Scott, you were mentioning Burbank Airport and LAX, and I was just thinking as I was standing there, what I often tell people, which is, if you ask me to pick you up from LAX, you need to be blood related to me, or I need to be willing to die for you. So the list of people I'm willing to pick up from LAX is very, very small, and all of that. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I did. I was able to take some time off and spend some time with my son Jude. We went into Koreatown, which was great, and I went into K-pop stores, which was great and fascinating. I ate a lot of great food, and it was a ton of fun. And so I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And in that line, I want to take just a moment to express my gratitude to you all for the opportunity that you've given me to come and preach these past few months as frequently as you have allowed me to. I think I've mentioned it in previous sermons, but I have recently been asked and have stepped into being the part-time interim youth minister for my home church, Culver Palms. And so in January, I'm going to be shifting my attention more towards that and serving in that capacity, which means, sadly, I won't be coming here to preach as regularly as I have. My last sermon will be on December 15th, and so I wanted to just take a moment to say thank you for all of the encouraging words and hospitality you've shown me. In a very real way, you've provided me an opportunity to do something that I've always hoped to do, which is to have the chance to preach regularly. If you had asked me 10 years ago what I would be doing today, running the chapel program at Pepperdine would not have been on that list, and that is seemingly where God has called me to. I always thought I'd be a preacher, and so this has been just a ton of fun for me and such a blessing to my life. So thank you for allowing me to come and preach as often as I have.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks. I will continue to pray for you all here at Simi as you continue to do God's work, as you seek I know you're in search of someone to come more regularly to preach, and I pray blessings upon that. This morning, I want to start a short 2-week series as we look towards celebrating Jesus' birth on Christmas. And throughout history, Christians have taken the 4 Sundays before Christmas to look at the 4 themes of hope, peace, love, and joy as they anticipated the celebration of Jesus' birth. So this morning, I want to invite us to focus in on this theme of hope, and then on the 15th, I will preach on the theme of love. Our text this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verses 25 through 36. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth there will be dismay among nations and their confusion over the roaring of the sea and surging waves. The planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. Then they will see the human one coming on a cloud with power and great splendor. Now when these things begin to happen, stand up straight and raise your heads, because your redemption is near. Jesus told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that the summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that God's kingdom is near. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until everything has happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. Take care that your hearts aren't dulled by drinking parties, drunkenness, and the anxieties of day-to-day life. Don't let that day fall upon you unexpectedly, like a trap. It will come upon everyone who lives on the face of the whole earth. Stay alert at all times, praying that you are strong enough to escape everything that is about to happen and to stand before the human one. So, our text this morning may seem like an odd choice for our sermon on the theme of hope at first read. And to be honest with you, as I worked on this sermon, I find myself more than once asking myself exactly what I was thinking when I chose to preach on this text. Because what I've discovered is that it is a difficult text to preach on. Part of the difficulty is that our text this morning is apocalyptic literature, which means that it's full of metaphors and symbols and images that are not easy to interpret or understand. Another difficulty is that popular interpretations have often shaped our cultural imagination of and about apocalyptic literature and apocalypses. So take a moment and just reflect for a second here on where your mind went when you heard the words apocalypse and apocalyptic. Chances are, if you're like me, then our minds immediately went to dramatic scenes of the end of the world, or maybe we had images from a movie flash before our eyes. You see, I think most of us, when we hear the word apocalyptic or apocalypse, we begin to think of the end times or a violent dystopian future where resources are scarce. And we think this way partly because our popular culture is fascinated with the end of the world. I did a Google search of apocalyptic movies and discovered that the website IMDb actually has a top 100 best disaster, apocalyptic, and post-apocalyptic movies. Now, if you go looking for it, I warn you that the list was created 11 years ago, and so it's bound to be an incomplete list today. Still, think about that. It is really impressive that there are enough of these kinds of movies that someone could create a top 100 list. And it's not only popular culture that is fascinated with the end times. Various Christians throughout history and even today have been and are fascinated with providing a vision of what the end of the world might look like. I went to a small private Christian school, 7th through 10th grade, and the school's theology was heavily influenced by their understanding of the end times. And so on school retreats, we watched the Left Behind movies, and speakers would often bring up what they thought the Bible said about the way that the world would end, which would often result in anxious students whose imaginations were captured and then began to worry about when and how the end of the world would come. My goal this morning is not to offer a detailed description of the various ways popular culture and Christians have think about the way the world will end, and then offer the pros and cons of each position. Rather, I want to offer a general critique of the various positions because I think they too often miss the point of what these texts are intended to do in the life of a Christian, which is that apocalyptic texts are meant to strengthen our hope in Jesus so that we might persevere in our faith until the day Jesus returns. And these kinds of texts accomplish this by reminding us that there is more to the cosmos than just the material world. Scholar Jeffrey C. Pugh offers this definition of the word apocalypse. It doesn't denote the end of all things. Rather, it means to provide us insight into what God sees and what God is doing in the world. Later in the video, Tim admits that apocalyptic texts are hard to understand for a lot of reasons. But he says this: the purpose of the apocalyptic literature is very clear. It is to give us heavenly perspective on our earthly circumstances, so that every generation of God's people can be challenged, comforted, and given hope for the future. Texts like Luke 21, 25 through 36 are meant to challenge, comfort, and give us hope for the future. They are meant to remind us of and invite us to trust that there is always more going on than our five senses can account for in the material world. When apocalyptic texts do speak of the end of the age or talk about signs before Jesus returns, they do so not to provide a roadmap of when and how it will come about. Rather, they do so to provide us comfort in knowing that the future will be different, and the hope that God is present in the world and still working, and that Jesus is indeed coming back. We get into trouble when we take this reminder and invitation and directions that lead us to begin to calculate and guess what the end of the world will look like or when it will take place, because when we do that, we miss the point of these texts. The texts are meant to challenge, comfort, and provide us hope. In Luke 21, 25 through 36, Jesus is speaking to a group of people who, back in verse 5 of chapter 21, have asked him to consider the beauty of the temple. In verses 6 through 24, leading up to our passage, Jesus speaks to them about the fall of Jerusalem, which takes place in 70 AD, and the destruction of the temple at the hands of the Roman Empire. And we need to keep in mind that the loss of the temple was a catastrophe for the Jewish people. The temple was the center of their faith, where sacrifices were offered and the presence of God resided. So the loss of the temple likely felt like the end of the world to the people who lived through its destruction, but Jesus is clear that the fall of Jerusalem is not tied to his return. In verse 25, Jesus then shifts to prophesying and speaking about general signs. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On earth there will be dismay among the nations and their confusion over the roaring of the sea and the surging of the waves. Scholar Diane G. Chen comments, the end of the age, however, will not follow immediately after the destruction of Jerusalem. The earth and its nations will continue to be ravaged by calamities. You see, people might have thought that the destruction of the temple was a sign of the end of the age, but Jesus is clear that the world will continue. In his commentary on Luke, New Testament scholar Luke Timothy Johnson notes that Jesus' words here in verses 25 through 38 lack any temporal reference or timetable. That is, the timing of Jesus' return is left entirely undetermined and unattached to any specific historical event. And based upon what we know of apocalyptic literature, this lack of detail shouldn't surprise us, because the point isn't to get us focused on the signs so we can predict when Jesus will return and what will happen when he does. The point is to challenge us to trust God, comfort us in the between times when we witness tragedies and calamities, and provide us hope when the chaos of the world seems to be getting out of hand and we are confronted with how little control we have over the events in the world and even the events in our own lives. We can be people of hope because we know and trust who Jesus is and that Jesus will return and make all things right. And I think from time to time, we need to be reminded that this is the kind of hope we've been called to as Christians. This is the kind of hope that matters most. It is the kind of hope that Lewis Smedes calls a fallback hope in his book, Keeping Hope Alive. Smead provides 3 different kinds of hope and suggests that we need to keep in mind which hopes matter most. The first hope is what he calls a preference hope. These are the hopes that we would prefer to come true, but if they don't, then while we may be slightly disappointed, nothing drastically changes in our lives. It doesn't drastically impact our well-being. For example, I hope that the Dodgers will repeat as World Series champions in 2025.
Amen.
Yes, and they got Blake Snell. They just signed him. I'm excited. But if they don't, I'm going to be slightly disappointed, but my disappointment won't last very long, and nothing substantial will have changed in my life. It's a preference hope. I prefer it to come true, but if it doesn't, I'm okay. Then there are what he calls vital hopes, and these kinds of hopes matter more to us. Smead writes, they are vital to us because they can mean the difference between happiness and sadness, maybe even life and death of the spirit. These are the kinds of hopes that if they do or don't come true, can substantially change our lives. They can affect our well-being. Likely, these are the kinds of hopes we find ourselves praying to God daily about. We hope our kids will be healthy and safe and courageous and do good in the world. We hope that we will have good health, or we hope healing will follow sickness. We hope for financial stability and the ability to provide for ourselves and our families. And most of us here this morning know the happiness that comes when one of our vital hopes comes true. And most of us have experienced the deep sadness and pain when a vital hope fails to come true. These are the kinds of hopes that matter more to us. The third kind of hope is the fallback hope. And Smead writes this of the fallback hope. A fallback hope is not a plan B hope to replace the hope we lost. It is a hope that supports all other living hopes and still survives when those hopes die. It is the kind of hope that finds us in our darkest moments of hopelessness and despair. It is the kind of hope that provides us with strength and courage to continue even when all seems lost. A fallback hope is not a naive hope of rose-colored glasses wearing optimism who deny the realities of loss and failure in the world. Rather, it is a hope that acknowledges the reality but trusts that the reality as we see it isn't the only possibilities that exist. It is the hope of the Old Testament prophets who constantly pointed to a future hope of a Messiah who would free and restore Israel. It is a hope that the shepherds witness when the angels appear to announce the birth of Jesus. It is a hope that sustained Anna and Simeon until the day they met baby Jesus and understood that the promised redemption was at hand. It is the hope that we cling to in those moments of loss when our vital hopes for our lives and the lives of those we love don't come true. It is the hope that our text this morning reminds us of, that there is always more going on in the world than we can see, and that Jesus will return, and we hope and trust that when he does, all things will be made right in the world. The fallback hope is the Christian hope that life follows death because Jesus has defeated the power of sin and death. And this hope is not dependent upon our efforts or any of our circumstances, but rather on the steadfast love of God for the world God created and is seeking the restoration of. And this hope is a patient hope. The Christian hope invites us to wait and trust God's timing. I think I understand the impulse of those who read apocalyptic literature and then speculate about the time and preceding events that will lead to the world's end. You see, I think the impulse is rooted in this human desire to control and know everything. It is rooted in the fear of the unknown and uncertain future. And so we try and fill in the picture as best as we can because we think if we know what to expect, then we'll be able to exert some control. We'll be able to better control the future. And so we look for hints about when and how it will look and be like. But Jesus' words aren't an invitation for us to control, to know the day and time, but rather they are an invitation to trust that God is working in the world and that they will come when Jesus will return. Jesus' words are an invitation to a patient hope, an invitation to a life of steadfast faith that trusts God. New Testament scholar N.T. Wright comments on our text. Patience is the key. Pray for strength to keep on your feet. There are times when your eyes will be shutting with tiredness, spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical, and you will have to prop them open. This is what it's about. Not an exciting battle with adrenaline flowing and banners flying, but the steady tread of prayer and hope and scripture and sacraments and witness day by day and week by week. We are called to a patient hope. We need to remember, though, that our patient hope is not a passive hope. We have roles to play and work to do in the world. We are called to pray for strength. We are called to stay alert. We are called not to be distracted. We are called to wait patiently for Jesus to return. And in our waiting, we are active as we seek to do the work God has given us. So this morning, my prayer is that we will wait patiently as people with hope because we know that Jesus stepped into this world as a baby born and was laid in a manger, and that Jesus died and was resurrected, that God is active and working in the world even when we find it difficult to see and understand, that the future of this world is not fully dependent on human genius or goodness, but rather on the steadfast love of God, that as followers of Jesus, our waiting is not inaction, but rather humble right action as we seek to grow in obedience to the way of Jesus. We wait patiently as people because we know and trust that Jesus is coming back someday. And so may we read texts like Luke 21, 25 through 36 and contemplate them, not so that we can gain special insight into the end of the world, but so that we might find encouragement and hope together as Christians as we live faithfully and invite others into the Christian hope of a life spent with God. May mercy, peace, and love be yours in abundance. Pray with me. God, we come with a patient hope, with trusting that your Son will return, trusting that there is always more going on in this world than we can see, trusting that you are working. God, I pray that we would be people who wait with patience, with hope, that we would be people, though, that don't confuse patience and hope with passivity, that we would be people who would have eyes to see and the ears to hear and the courage to do the work that you have called us to do, that we would pray for strength, that we would not be distracted, that we would stay alert and look for the ways that you show up in this world, look for the ways that you are calling us to share your good news, that you so loved this world, God, that you sent your Son Jesus to live and die and be resurrected so that we might have life now and into forever with you. God, may we be people who share that story. I pray this in Christ's name and through the Spirit.